The following presentation will provide a brief comparison between France and the United States. We will be using the PESTEL framework to analyze the two countries. The country of France has a population of around 64.6 million citizens, ranging over a total area of 640,679 square kilometers. The capital city is Paris. The two major languages spoken in the country are French and English, and the two most common currencies used are the franc and the euro. According to the World Factbook, France operates under a semi-presidential republic, with Emmanuel Macron currently in the position of president or chief of state, and Edouard Philippe in the position of prime minister or head of government. France remains a free country according to the Freedom House organization, with an aggregate score of 90 out of 100 and an overall freedom rating of 1.5 out of 7. According to Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, France was ranked 23rd in the world in 2016, following closely behind the United States, who was ranked 18th. Over the past decade, France's score has shifted only slightly within the range of 68 to 72 out of 100. On a global scale, France remains in the top 15% of countries with regard to Rule of Law Index, but has shown a steady decrease over the last decade when it comes to political stability and absence of terrorism and violence, with a sharp drop in 2016, according to the Worldwide Governance Indicators. In addition, France has remained in the top 20% globally with regard to voice and accountability. The data collected from the World Bank shows that overall, and in comparison to the United States, France has remained a country where citizens are able to actively participate in government elections, uphold a fair justice system, and avoid politically motivated terrorism and violence. Moving on to economic indicators, France has shown major improvements with regard to human development, including a gradual increase in life expectancy, a decrease in the annual homicide rate, and an increase in the number of years of school on average that each citizen is expected to attend. There does not appear to be a consistent trend with France's FDI outflows and inflows, which implies that the country's domestic producers and consumers' dependency on foreign providers and the domestic firms' dependency on foreign demand remains ever-changing. According to the World Bank, France is showing a gradual increase in both GNI and GDP as an annual percentage, following a significant lapse in 2012. Overall, France remains an active competitor in global trade.
To begin the social cultural indicators, we have Trump-Inars data and Hofstede's dimensions. Both of these are character aspects of the populations of each of these countries. So the things that speak out most to me about both of these sections are on Trump-Inars data, France scores less than the United States on every category. And in Hofstede's dimensions, the uncertainty avoidance of France is significantly higher than the United States. What this says to me is that France is very specific about certain things, and they want things to be done a certain way, which could benefit them in the business world. And we speak about that on our SWOT analysis at the bottom as well. And then also another interesting thing, our primary data comes from a friend of mine, Stacy Smith, who spent some time in her undergrad in France for study abroad. And so when we get to the indulgence piece, we see that on our chart, France scores lower than the United States on indulgence. However, according to Stacy's statement, the French value time off work more than we do and have more holidays they honor by spending that time with family. For example, we had 2 weeks for spring break instead of 1, and we also had many 3-day weekends and holidays where school was closed. They also take a lunch away from their desk. What I see is kind of contradictory is that, the United States, it seems that we have a higher indulgence score, which would mean to me that we would show more emphasis in those areas, and it doesn't feel like we do. However, that's how we score. So I found that quite interesting. The next thing that I want to talk about is religions. So this graph of religions is very telling about the difference between the United States and France, as far as the USA being seen as a melting pot of different types of people. We have tons of different religions represented on this chart, and in France it seems that over half of their population is Roman Catholic. So I find that very interesting, and I feel like that really affects their culture as far as the majority of the people that live there being Roman Catholic. Next, I want to go to the Pisa Scores. So we have scientific, math, and reading averages for all of these scores for France and the United States, and this is based off of tests that 15-year-olds have taken in each of our countries. So these tests are, based off the interpretation of the content that these students have been taught. And you can see overall that our education in both of the countries are on par with each other, and they're also very high scores for the entire world. So it's pretty interesting that as far as education, we're kind of on par. Next, I want to go to technological indicators. We have here some interesting data regarding research and development. The French spend almost as much on research and development as the United States does. However, when we look at the patents and the scientific and technological journal articles, the United States is outputting a lot more patents and a lot more journal articles than the French are. So that kind of goes back up to the individualism piece. If you look at Hofstede's data and Trump and ours data, the French are more collective. They're a more collective society than the United States. So they are doing research and development as a whole for their country, and the United States seems to be doing it more on an individual level. So that is kind of what I've taken from this data that I have, and you can definitely see more of that for yourself, and based off of our SWOT analysis, you can draw your own conclusions. But those are what I have found as the most interesting pieces of these two areas.
As we look at the environmental indicators for France, we use the Environmental Performance Index, or EPI, and we compare it to that of the United States. France ranks 27th in the world out of 178 countries that are part of this index. The United States ranks 33rd. France has a score of 71.05 to the US's 67.52. Now, they both have been trending up over the past 10 years. France has increased about 3 1/3%, and the US has gone up about 2 1/4% in their rankings and score. The main areas where France is higher ranking and beats out the United States are due to the health impacts from the environment and the water and sanitation, where in those two categories are ranked number 1. As we move on to legal indicators, we see that France ranks below the US when it comes to intellectual property rights, meaning they just don't put a high priority on intellectual property, and that also is why we see a lower number of patent protection for France than the United States, and that's steady over the past 10 years, although 9 and 10 years ago the gap was much bigger, so France has closed the gap somewhat, but it's still a steady and noticeable difference than the US. France's legal system is a civil law system versus that of the US being common law. Basically, this means that all their laws are written in code and are strictly adhered to when cases go before a judge and those decisions are made. Whereas in the United States, judges will use past cases and the precedences set by those cases to determine their judgment on a present case, and how that law that was written 100 years ago, for example, may or may not really apply in the same fashion today. As we take a quick look at the SWOT for France, we see in their strengths that they are ranked 21st in the world for Human Development Index, which points to a promising positive development of their country. Their PISA scores are fairly high for both boys and girls, showing they have a good secondary education system. One of their weaknesses is the lack of patents coming out of France, as mentioned earlier, due to intellectual property rights being a low priority. An opportunity for them would be to focus more on innovation and creating patents, since they have the momentum from their research and development. And a high uncertainty avoidance has potential to boost the development of complex technologies. Threats to France: they are investing significantly in research and development, but there is no correlation between that and the volume of journal articles published. They also seem to have a deterioration of political stability in 2016, which could breed other economic issues. And finally, languages On the World Factbook listed as 100% French. Lack of diversity in language could create barriers to market entry.